Building websites is a breeze with the framework as you please, easy as slicing cheese with the tools such as these. Structured pages quick, no CSS to make you sick. Use the layout that you pick, navigation helps you click. Icons, buttons, you can tap your containers, close the gap. Responsive gridding is a snap. You'll be launching off the map, blasting off with Bootstrap, blasting off with Bootstrap.
Welcome back to Blasting Off with Bootstrap. This is Level 5, Section 1, JavaScript Components. We did a lot of work to make our navigation look really awesome, but if we shrink our screen down a little bit into extra small mode, well, things don't look exactly like we expect. In this small size, we won't be able to have our brand link and our nav list on the same horizontal row. Instead, we'll need to find a way to make better use of our vertical space. But we really don't want the first thing people see when they visit our site is a really big list of links where they have to scroll down just to book tickets. Maybe we could do something to make our navigation collapsible. Here's what we'll be going for in this section. When a visitor visits our page, they'll see our title and they'll see this little icon to expand our navigation. When they click on that, we'll expand our nav, and then they can click on one of these other links to head over to that part of our site. To do this, we'll need to add some behavior to our website. Now, we mentioned before that CSS is for styling our web page. This includes things like changing the background of the page, increasing the font size, or even adding padding around an element. In order to add behavior to our page, though, we're going to need to add a little bit of JavaScript. So what do I mean when I say behavior? Well, that could be things like responding in some way when an element is clicked, or when a specific key is pressed. These are things that cannot be controlled through CSS or HTML alone. Here's a recap of our navigation so far. This UL element contains our links. We want to be able to switch between seeing a list of those links or seeing an icon of some kind. To start things off, we can add a class of collapse to our UL element. This will completely hide our navigation for all screen sizes. In order to make it show up for specific sizes, you might think of using the visible classes we talked about before. Well, that isn't ideal for this situation though, because we're not using grids for our navigation bar. Instead though, we can search through the Bootstrap docs on navigation and see what they suggest. Turns out there's a specific class just for this case called navbar-collapse. This class will cause the element to show up in small screens and above, but to be hidden only for extra small screens. Next, let's add a button that we can click on to show that nav that's only visible in extra small mode. We'll need to create this button here in the nav bar, making sure to put it before our nav list. We'll give it some informative text. Let's say toggle navigation. Now, if we view just this piece on a phone, well, it's getting there. We do have our work cut out for us on this one. Let's see how to style and position it a little more attractively. Even though we've labeled our button, we don't actually want that toggle navigation text to show up because it's a little bit long. So how can we hide that without hiding the button? To do that, we can wrap that text in a span with a class of sr-only. sr-only stands for screen readers only, and that means that the contents of that element will only be available to software that reads screen content to the visually impaired. This is a good practice to get into. It's kind of like adding alt tags for images. If we didn't do this, then visitors to our site using screen readers wouldn't know what this button does. If we view this button now, it doesn't have anything in it though, and it shows up right next to our brand. Let's move it over to the right a little bit, kind of like what we saw in our finished product. To position our button all the way over to the right, we can use the navbar-toggle class, which will float our button all the way to the right of wherever it currently is. Bootstrap has some other helper classes for floating elements left and right that you can use elsewhere on your page, including pull-left and pull-right. It looks like our button is in the right place, but it still needs an icon. And how do we make it actually do something when we click on it? Let's start by adding an icon. One way to add an icon here would be to use a glyphicon, like we did earlier. The problem with that is that it won't scale correctly, which would cause it to stand out from the rest of our header. The solution for this, and you can probably guess what I'm going to say by now, is to create a new element with a class provided by Bootstrap. In this case, we're going to create a span with a class of icon-bar. This class will add a single small horizontal bar. In total though, we're adding 3 horizontal bars to provide that hamburger icon look that our users are familiar with. Alright, so let's see what our button looks like in a browser. If we open this up and resize our browser to a small size, we can see that our full navigation list of links is visible. If we shrink our browser a little bit more though, our navigation disappears and is completely replaced by our little button. Okay, sweet. Now, on extra small devices, the first thing people will see is that Book Tickets Now button, just like we want. Cool, we've got our button, but what does it do? In this case, nothing yet. Let's work on making that button functional. To do that, we're going to need to add some behavior using JavaScript. Before adding that code, let's plan out exactly what we want to happen. Here's the button that we just created as part of our list of links that's being hidden in extra small mode. What we really want is for the collapse class to be removed from our list of links whenever this button is clicked. Then, if our user clicks the button again, we should add the collapse class back to that unordered list to hide the links once again. To do that, we're going to need to use the Bootstrap JavaScript Collapse plugin. But how do we get started using JavaScript with Bootstrap? Back in level 1, we already added our Bootstrap JavaScript library to the page, but we haven't used it yet. Each Bootstrap JavaScript library is a little bit different, but kind of like our CSS classes, they follow some of the same patterns. The 2 main ways to use most Bootstrap JavaScript plugins is by adding additional data attributes to specific elements on your page. This is similar to how we've been adding all those classes to our page, but now instead of adding a class attribute, we'll be adding data attributes. This is the method we'll be using in this course. Now, there is also another way of using all of the Bootstrap plugins by writing raw JavaScript as well. This requires a little more knowledge of the plugins, and knowing the basics of jQuery will definitely help out. We won't be looking into that method in this course, but we'd encourage you to check it out. It's probably a lot easier than you'd think and can help out in a pinch. So here's our button once again. Remember what we wanted to do here? We want to toggle the existence of the collapse class on the UL element. To do that, we need to specify which class to toggle using the data-toggle attribute and specifying collapse. The idea is that this will add and remove the collapse class from some element on the page. But what element? We need to add a second attribute of data-target, which is a CSS selector for any element on the page. In this case, we'll use .navbar-collapse because there's only one element on our page that matches that CSS selector, our list of links. The first time we click on this button, it's going to remove the collapse class from our unordered list. If we click on the button again, it's going to add the collapse class back into our unordered list, causing it to be hidden. Let's check it out. Sweet, we have liftoff. Our toggle works and expands when clicked, but the position of our links is a little bit off. What we really need is for the blasting off with Bootstrap part to be on its own row with the button. Then, when the button is clicked, we'd want each link within our list to be on its own row underneath the brand. Let's see what we need to change to make that happen. Here's our navigation bar so far. When we think about how to organize our elements, what we really need is for our brand and our toggle button to be on one row, while our list of links rests below the brand with one link on each row. Like our grid system, this means we'll need to group these elements by wrapping them in some new elements. Our brand and button can be wrapped in a div with a class of navbar-header. This navbar-header class will cause the header to take up the entire width of the navbar on extra small screens. Think of it as being similar to call XS12, what we use to make an element take up the entire width of the page on extra small screens. Luckily, we don't need to do anything with our list of links. We're already grouping all of these links within a list, which will now show up below our header. Let's see what this looks like in a browser. If we open this up in a browser and shrink our page down to extra small mode, we'll see that the button works correctly and expands our links. When we click that button again, it will collapse our links just like when we loaded the page. Each link is on its own row as well, helping them be much easier to click when using a phone. In larger resolutions, like on our laptop, the navigation looks exactly the same as when we started. Hey, at least we didn't break anything. And that's the end of Level 5, Section 1. It's time for you to try your hand at JavaScript components in the challenges, and I'll see you back for Section 2.